And today we're going to talk about stablecoins, right? So request for startups is something that YC does every now and then, and it's pretty much a bunch of partners saying, okay, we want builders to build this. And here in 2024, they said, we'd like to fund great teams building B2B and consumer products on top of stablecoins, tools and platforms that enable stablecoin finance and more stablecoin protocols themselves. So I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. So let's see what's in their latest batch. Maybe there is a company that we know and love. And yeah, I went ahead and checked. In total, there's 142 in the latest batch. And yeah, how many stablecoin protocols do we have in there? Exactly 0. It's even worse. It's even 0 crypto companies in there. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. Are they sleeping on stablecoins? Okay, maybe there's a lag. So okay, let's forget the narrative. Let's look at the numbers. And I came to realize, okay, stablecoin size is serious, right? Since 2021, where it was around 35 billion, until today, where it's 240 billion, we have a compounded annual growth rate of around 64%, and that's huge. Then you have these funny colors on here that represent sort of where these stablecoins live on, and of course, it's on the most of the bulk lives on the only censorship-resistant and credibly neutral blockchain that there is, which is of course Tron, Solana. I mean, okay, let's stop the jokes. It's the world computer Ethereum, of course. So I would make the case and say that crypto stablecoins, I mean, are the first crypto app with a product market fit. And yeah, why do I think that's the case? There's a couple of reasons for that. And I think the first most obvious one is, okay, institutions are coming in and legitimizing stablecoins, right? You have BlackRock coming in with a BUIDL, tokenized assets fund on chain. You have Fidelity launching its own stablecoin. You have Visa settling USDC payments on L1s. You have Stripe acquiring Bridge for over $1 billion. These are serious numbers, right? Then looking at the numbers, as we've seen before, adoption is real, right? We have over $33 trillion in transferred stablecoins over the last year. We have more than 250 million unique addresses, and out of which 313K are average. We have an average monthly active users, which is sort of unique addresses in this context. And then over 1% of the global M1 money supply is in stablecoins. Then another interesting thing is happening in emerging markets. Right? There's this Castle Island Ventures report that I read, and like a really big part of crypto users in Brazil, India, Turkey, Nigeria use stablecoins. Then a really good chunk of that, surprisingly, use them for yield, 40%, and then another good chunk as well use it to even receive salaries, right? So even if in the Western world we don't see that usage as apparent, then in emerging markets, this is much more tangible, and we're much further in that front. Yeah, and then on the infrastructure side, we have over $1 billion in tokenized T-bills. We have Stable Act and the Genius Act that are progressing in the US and hopefully pass Congress soon. In MiCA, so in Europe, we already have MiCA enabling Europe, this first compliant Euro stablecoin. That's kind of boring, this category, but that's still important, and sort of the highest thing to legitimize, like the most important thing that the government can do to legitimize sort of something, which is putting it into the law book. And yeah, also on the narrative side of things, I think there are some shifts happening. We have stablecoins being used not only for trading, but there's actually, this treasury stack emerging that I'm going to talk about later as well. It goes from speculation to programmable money, and overall, it's used not only in crypto for crypto native nerds, right? But it also becomes a macro relevant sort of infrastructure. So I was thinking, okay, then YC is sort of living under a rock, and we're sort of, we're living the future of France already. and then I went on to DeFi Llama and saw, okay, 191 stablecoins. And then when you think about actually using these stablecoins, where, yeah, you need to check which one has the most liquidity if you're sending large sums, which chain they live on, etc. And then I was thinking, okay, this sort of abundance of stablecoins is not really, yeah, good from the user perspective, but it's really fragmented and shows that UX is pretty bad at the moment. So yeah, I would say no, we're not fully there yet. And then, yeah, I would like to take a step back and sort of look at what stablecoins are actually doing, right? And Matt Brown, this investor at Matrix Partners, has, I think, a pretty good mental model of how he thinks about this. And he says there's sort of two lenses that you can view stablecoin use cases through. And the first one is sort of the bridge between fiat and crypto world, where value is more in the currency itself and its stability than in the infrastructure. And sort of the access to global, nearly permissionless form of money is sort of where the value accrues, especially in countries, emerging countries that don't have access to the US dollar, right? And then on the other side, he says, okay, there's also an emerging use case, which is the parallel infrastructure within fiat systems or between different fiat systems. So in this case, the value is in the stablecoin infrastructure itself much more than in the stablecoin itself. So yeah, and then sort of these properties of being fast, cheap, are sort of what create value. And then I would add a third sort of dimension to look at, which is sort of the end user proximity, which pretty much means, okay, how close is this innovation to the end user, which makes it feel really tangible, and he sees the actual benefits from it. And I think taking all these three things together, you can eventually get to sort of this fully fledged fintech stack. So what do I mean by that? Another mental model I would like to introduce is to say, okay, what are the actual order of benefits that come from stablecoins? And here, I think there's three main ones. There's the first one, which is fairly obvious. You have a fast and cheap money movement that comes from stablecoins, right? You have lower transaction costs, you have improved liquidity. Okay, that's obvious. That's a no-brainer. And the emergent vertical here is payments. Easy, A to B. Then the second order of benefit is, okay, what do I do beyond sort of just transferring stablecoins back and forth? Is, okay, you can actually earn yield on it. And because of that, you sort of expand the market that you can target. You can enable things like automation because of smart contracts, etc. And this frictionless UX sort of unlocks then new behaviors in the markets. And then the third order of benefit, which is sort of the highest order of benefit that sort of utilizes the the maximum amount that you can do from stablecoins, is sort of neobanks in the end, where you have new business models that emerge. You have rent-seeking intermediaries like SWIFT, like the interbanking system, that are displaced. And then this is where sort of the whole value accrual from TradFi moves on-chain into the crypto world. And yeah, I think that's sort of where the potential to redesign the entire financial stack emerges. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk about each of these order of benefits and have a look at what actually happens here. So if you talk about payments, this sort of obvious first use case, we have on the surface layer sort of what the user sees. Pretty obvious what we see already today, 24/7, 365, instant global settlement, transfers in seconds for almost no cost. We don't need pre-funded liquidity anymore. And that's sort of the foundation for efficient B2B and consumer payment experiences. That's very obvious, I think. Then moving a little bit deeper, what's actually required to do that is vertical-specific orchestration, routing, compliance. We need, solid on and off ramps, embedded wallets, FX liquidity, cash collection, settlement, merchant tools. All these things need to be in place, and of course compliance, the boring stuff. And then at the core of all that sort of would be what I talked before, is sort of the replacement of Swift, these Swift chains and card networks that sort of power cross-border B2B platforms. And then, of course, also frictionless consumer remittance products in emerging markets, for example. Right. Then, sort of, on top of, if we go further again and talk about yield on top of these stablecoins, what we see on top is the treasury yield products that we already have today, which is, yeah, simple yield-bearing stablecoin accounts. We have an accessible, familiar UX for corporate treasuries, individual investors. You have ideally a direct integration with TradFi banking interfaces. A little bit below that, you have the actual yield instruments themselves, so tokenized fixed-term deposits, transparent credit markets, automated decentralized lending pools matching lenders and borrowers efficiently. And then at the core of all that, you have the actual composable US Treasury tokens, for example. You have money market instruments, real-time net asset value, instant issuance and redemption of these instruments, and then, of course, institutional-grade security compliance and liquidity. Then I went on to stablewatch.io. It's a pretty cool site if you want to check it out. And then also saw that, just to put this into context, only 4.5% of all stablecoins are yield-bearing. So I think that just goes to show how big the opportunity here is and how underappreciated that still is. And then sort of, if we look at the third big sort of order of effect, which I think is the most interesting one, is sort of the neobank UX on the surface layer, where you can have automated payroll, invoicing, freelance payments. Some companies already do that today, by the way. You have consumer-friendly saving, investment, investing, spending apps, effortless onboarding, trust-minimized mobile-first experiences. This is sort of what then I always think about, like, my mom, right? Like, everything that we do in crypto, okay, what does she actually care about? And I think this would be something that she would actually then appreciate, and that's what she would see, right? Then if we go a little bit below that, for that, what do we need? We need, yeah, white label wallet infrastructure, for custodial, non-custodial management. We need built-in compliance, KYC, transaction policies, like Predicate, for example, one of our portfolio companies that do that. We need modular, customizable sort of infrastructure for rapid deployment across different markets, because all of these different markets have very different, inefficient old systems that all need to sort of be compatible with. And then at the core of all this, as we talked about before, this is really where we need always-on interoperable stablecoin infrastructure. Need these low-cost real-time settlement layers like Ethereum and its L2s, and yeah, developer-friendly composable frameworks to really launch these products on top of it. So yeah, remember when I said we're not living the future of France yet, and what do I mean by that? And I think you can distill this into sort of something that I would call a last-mile problem, where it's not just about creating stablecoins, but about making them usable, trusted, and integrated into the real world. And I think the blockers are familiar for many people, that, okay, you have this regulatory gap, right, where you have no global clarity, everybody's sort of afraid of impending action from the regulators, conflicting requirements and all that. Access in UX is still a big problem, where it's hard to onboard users. You have limited fiat access, and sort of there's this looming low trust for non-crypto users. And then there's also this compliant friction, right? Where you have these KYC burdens that kill UX and yeah, almost kill sort of this crypto ethos that we have, right? Where you have permissionless access to money. And then what do we need to sort of overcome these challenges? I think is also sort of 3 points where, okay, custody and compliance needs to be solved. We need stablecoin orchestration. For example, SphereNet and Plasma are doing that, where you have routing, abstraction, and automation of these flows. Also, I think on the wallet layer, there's a lot of work to be done where I don't see a future where I need to ask you, okay, which stablecoin do you want? Is it Pi USD or what? And then I only have USDC, and then I need to bridge it back and forth just to make the transfer. I think it's going to be more of a thing where I see USD in my wallet or in my account, and you have USD, and I just send it, and I don't really care what's happening in the back end. And then also on and off ramps need to be more seamless. Cool, so what do we see as sort of the road ahead here? I think as first big blocker and thing that's coming is institutional grade infrastructure and custody. We see that already happening. That's really good. This is really sort of the tailwind, and I would say the floor of innovation, because it's not really sexy, it's just a requirement. Regulatory clarity is coming. Incumbents are continuing, and institutions are continuing to build on top of stablecoins. Everybody wants their own stable, right? And then, yeah, with that, institutional liquidity comes in as well. And all of this sort of legitimizes and enhances systemic trust. Then, as a second one, I think would be localized and non-USD stablecoins, so sort of the long tail of USD stablecoins that will emerge. So where regional issuers can design for local payment rails that are different in every country, or many countries, and compliance frameworks, which would then also reduce USD dependency to some extent in the global stablecoins supply. But then I think also that USD supply will continue to grow, maybe more than 1% to 2% of the M1 money supply. And I think that's going to be an up-only chart. And then thinking ahead further is what I think we all would love to see is sort of the phase 2 tokenization, where other real-world assets like equities, bonds, credit, real estate would move fully on-chain, where you could have sort of these fractionalized, let's say fractionalized real estate on Aave, and you can borrow against that and do many fun DeFi things with it. I think that's going to restructure capital markets because of this enhanced transparency and automation, and that's really a question of time here. Ultimately, that's going to unlock global participation and novel paths for future accrual. I'm really excited for that, and I think that stablecoins aren't the end game here. They're rather the infrastructure layer for programmable finance, and possibly even, who knows, sort of kickstart this next wave of mass user adoption. At this point, I'd also like to do my own little request for startups. These are 3 things that we'd love to see happening and that we'd love to back. For example, privacy-preserving stablecoin infrastructure, where you have wallets, payments, or UX layers with built-in privacy defaults. We'd love to see mobile-first stablecoin fintechs in emerging markets. So think about Revolut, but stablecoin native, built for Africa, Southeast Asia, LATAM. Or FX routing layers between stablecoins, which are also super important, I think, where you have on-chain swaps between USD, Euro, Brazilian Real, whatever, fiat, with local liquidity. So yeah, that's it. If you know anyone or if you're building that, feel free to hit me up and connect with me. As we already heard before, there's sort of the stablecoin article that's coming soon that you can check out as well. So yeah, make sure to follow us on Twitter and stay tuned.
Okay, big applause. Okay, thank you for the talk. Let's see if there are any questions. So please raise your hand and microphone is going to come to you. So, gentleman in the middle.
Hey, thanks for the talk. Very insightful. I wanted to ask, what would, in your view, like what would be the edge of a fresh team starting up? I mean, you guys are very early ventures, right? So, you know, we're seeing like Tether launching their own chain, and quite a few very like capitally backed organizations in the space are pushing the frontiers, and they have a very big platform to work off of. Like, how can a startup compete?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that. I think what you're saying is valid, and also if you look at this acquisition of Bridge by Stripe, it's huge, right? And I think if we come in at valuations of 15 to 25 million, that's not really comparable. So we would never sort of come in at a round of Bridge, for example, at that stage, right? But I think there is still opportunities, especially in emerging markets, where sort of the barrier to entry is much lower than in these big ones like the US and Europe. You do raise a valid point, because especially regulation then makes it harder, increasingly harder, right, to sort of build, and you're not going to acquire all these sort of licenses to do that. So it's a valid point, and it's a good question. And I would say look at emerging markets where you have still sort of this regulatory arbitrage, and have fun there.
Okay, we had a question here in the first row.
I have a comment and I have a question. So the comment is the following, is that you mentioned BlackRock's Biddle, and from my experience, blockchain networks are using Biddle as the metrics for their adoption by institutions. But the thing is that since the beginning, if you go under the hood, the primary activity is happening on the Ethereum level. And that's it. So other blockchains, the supply is provisioned, but there is no activity happening there. So just a comment and a question is that in the nearest future is going to be all these stable coins. Then there's going to be also a number of retail CBDCs and wholesale CBDCs. How do you see their coexistence in terms of these roles? What entity is going to be what? Used for what?
Are you talking about permissionless and permissioned stablecoins?
Yep.
About that sort of how they live together?
Yeah, your opinion on that.
That's a very interesting topic, because the more permissioned the stablecoin is, the further apart it is from this cypherpunk crypto ethos. So I think, and with everything, right, you have first innovation that happens and then regulation that catches up slowly. And I think we have to sort of push the boundaries on what's possible on the permissionless cypherpunk ethos side, and then regulation will slowly adapt. So even if you have this Europe, for example, which is probably hyper permissioned and censorable, and you can probably tax on chain and things like that, I think this is still a win in that sense. And you can also see that by Tether sort of pulling out of the OS with this USDT. Honestly, I think while we have them, we should be lucky, and we should be able to use it. But then it's more of a political issue, right? How regulation will eventually catch up onto that, and I think there will always be sort of a space for that. I mean, you can even see Monero, for example, today still existing, right? Even though it's super private and very much sort of non-compliant in that sense. So yeah, I think the whole pie will grow, and with that also this non-permissionless, this actually permissionless part. But I do think that regulation is a danger for that, for sure. And then I think also thinking about this debate, right, where sometimes people say like, hey, if USDC is permissioned, then why wouldn't I use it on Solana? It doesn't. It's probably the same thing as on Ethereum, right? But then the crux here, the kicker is that, okay, sure, Circle can censor your USDC, but then if it's on Ethereum, that's the only party that can censor your Ethereum, your stablecoin, and not the validators or the builders or whoever else. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we had another question there in the middle.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask, like, let's say, a philosophical thing. If we have stable coins right now and they have some real-world assets like US treasuries and so on, they receive some yield from it. Also, they receive revenues from fees, commissions, and etc. Would they share it with us, with users of stablecoins?
So let's say if TradFi is completely coming on chain, then if all these fees generated typically in TradFi would also accrue to the user, is what you're saying. I think that's going to be the market fixing, hopefully, that, and sort of a competition would emerge. As we've seen before, sort of there's a very tiny part of the whole stablecoin supply that's yield bearing, right? And that I suppose would change in the future, and you already have Athena, Resolve, Usual, and the likes that sort of go in this direction. But I think it's still sort of a little early or not as mature yet that we say, okay, the standard form of payment is going to be a staked version of or a yield-bearing USD stablecoin. So I think that's where there will be a lot of growth happening. And the reason for just USDT being that simple, I think, at the moment is that its primary use case is still payments only. So especially or payments only, or the USD backing aspect, right? Emerging countries, for example, they care mostly about the USD because that's just so deflationary compared to their local currency, right? And then 2 to 3% of yield on top of that don't make a big difference. That'd be my hypothesis. Yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, then let's give a huge applause.
Okay.